All right. Welcome everyone to our May 2021 DAG monthly meeting. I just hit record, so you should know that we are now recording this meeting. My name is Eli Storch. I'm the chair of the Design Advocacy Group, and it's a real pleasure to have everyone here for our meeting on Philadelphia's music scene, the venues they occupy, and how they're working to resist development pressure. Before we get going with the presentation and the program, I wanted to go around that we'll do a few announcements, few advocacy updates, things like that. Throughout the meeting, if you have any announcements, things you want to share, ongoing events, please put them in the chat and we'll make sure to shout them out. Also, if you have any technical issues, you can message myself, you can message David Brownlee or Lachelle Weathers, our wonderful DAG fellow, and we will do our best to help you out. And then during the presentation itself, if you have questions, please put them in the chat because there'll be a Q&A at the end. So as we get started here, I wanted to throw to George and David to talk through a few advocacy updates, ongoing things that you guys are looking at. David and George.
Yeah, I'll take the first swing at it. The Philadelphia Gas Works buildings, the wonderful Gothic revival buildings of the 1850s and 60s that we've talked about before, and which the Design Advocacy Group has taken a formal position supporting their historic designation. That was supposed to come up to the Historical Commission tomorrow, but it's being pushed back to November, to one of the meetings when they believe that they'll be meeting in person. In the meantime, there's a very interesting piece on the DAG forum written by Oscar Bysert, who wrote the nomination of the buildings, explaining their historical significance. So it's another reason for you to take a look at DAG forum, where you'll also see a very interesting piece critical of the proposal of the Durst Company for Columbus Boulevard. And you might take a look at that as well. Those two most recent postings in DAG forum, I hope will encourage other people to write thoughtful, provocative, informative pieces and submit them to DAG forum. We really do aim to widen our understanding of Philadelphia's built environment, and it's a place where you can sound off on the things that you're interested in. I think many of you probably saw the piece in the Inquirer this morning by Inga Saffron, lamenting the fact that even as it appears that there's going to be city and probably federal money to improve Spring Garden Street, turn it into that wide roadway into the boulevard that it can be, there are serious historic preservation challenges on the street. Most notably, probably most freshest in our minds is probably the former Reading Railroad Station at Spring Garden Street, where the viaduct crosses Spring Garden Street, where the Reading Railroad Company has resisted efforts to save the building, and is in the process now of demolishing or beginning to demolish that non-designated building that really could be the connector between a revitalized, reutilized viaduct, the Philadelphia High Line, and Spring Garden Street. It is a historic opportunity slipping through our fingers at this moment. Another thing that I think many people will have noted is that the mayor did not, in his budget, recommend an increased staff budget for the Historical Commission. In fact, the Historical Commission is down one from where it was 2 years ago, and the new budget doesn't even restore that position. So as we face these enormous challenges, we are facing them with very few resources. George, you want to take it over?
Okay.
Oh, and I'm going to make one more plug here. If you like what you hear at today's DAG meeting, or if you just want to argue about it, send DAG some money. Go to our website, go to DAG's website, and make a charitable, fully tax-deductible donation.
Just a question. Are you seeing a church on fire on your screen right now?
We are.
Okay.
We are, unfortunately.
This was probably the most evocative photograph I could find of the St. Leo's fire in Tacony. Very tragic event. many people may not know that Tacony is a very interesting
Because he didn't even know.
town in town, or new town in town, because it was
Signatures.
the home of the Distant Saw Company, which was a world famous maker of saws. And they gave Distant Park, which this church faces. And here's the church in better days. And the complex is really quite interesting. You see the school on the left and the rectory and the church itself. So it's hopeful that this site will still have life in it, and a very tragic thing. And it's also a great concern, as we have many religious buildings that are not in use right now that are very much ticking time bombs of lack of supervision and old wiring and old systems that leave them at great risk. If anyone wants to make a comment, I'll ask for that, but otherwise I'm going to move on to another loss. Okay. Helmut Jahn died in a tragic bicycle accident just west of Chicago over the weekend. And this is how he was known. You might say he was one of the few architects to ever be on the front page of GQ. But this is how most architects think of him and knew him. I had the privilege to visit actually this space in Chicago many years ago. And the very blunt and plain-spoken former editor of the Architectural Review made the following comment, which I'm going to disagree with. Her comment, Catherine Slessor, said, Helmut Jahn, architect of Chicago's Thompson Center and Berlin's Sony Center at Potsdamer Platz, who left Germany for Illinois and perfected a brand of sick, bombastic pomo, has been killed in a cycling crash aged 81. This was not a particularly cordial statement, and I want to try to rebut it a little bit as I just say a few nice things about Helmut Jahn. It's of course his only building in Philadelphia, both buildings of Liberty Place, which he worked on with the tireless developer Willard Rouse. And it was a huge issue as to whether one could morally build higher than City Hall. And I remember being asked to comment on that to the press, and I said yes. And one of my reasons was that the buildings that were lower than City Hall all looked the same. They looked like refrigerators. And you could see several of the refrigerators in the foreground with Liberty Place behind them. Helmut Jahn did many such buildings, and they probably helped build a great fortune for him, as he was led a very affluent lifestyle. But he did wonderful things. This is a student center at IIT. This is the Thompson Center, which is the subject of a preservation battle in Illinois right now, because it had some what are now obsolete energy issues, single glazing in some cases. But this was a state office building that was designed around a large public atrium. It's a wonderful building, and it's hopeful that it will be preserved, but it doesn't look all that optimistic at the moment. And I think this is the last one. This is an astonishing building. This is the new part is 2.5 feet wide. This is on Kurfürstendamm in Berlin, and this was a combined renovation of the historic buildings that you see on the left with a new structure facing Kurfürstendamm on the right. And I think this belies that he was only the author of bellicose postmodern structures. He was certainly a very aggressive architect, and we are impoverished without him. So I respectfully disagree with the esteemed editor of Architectural Review. And now I will turn it, to David. I have about 3 slides here, David.
Well, I hope that some of you have gotten up to see the opening of the, for what is going to be for quite a while, the final phase of Frank Gehry's project at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the so-called CORE project, which which involves this redo of the west entrance hall, Lenfest Hall, through which you can now see through into both the grand upper stair hall on either side of the Martin Puryear work that hangs against that blank white wall, and also down under the great stair hall to the new great stair hall, which is called the Forum, the Williams Forum, named for Connie and Sankey Williams, to which you descend on this sort of double Baroque stair, or maybe Rococo is the right word for it. The interior of this space, this was the old auditorium space. And what it now serves as, well, I think it's now like walking into a sectional drawing. You can finally figure out how all the various parts of the building are related to each other, because in a sense, they're all connected now to these central spaces. You see Lenfest Hall ahead of you at the top of the stairs, and on either side, you see the enfilade of new galleries, which are in the area of the former gift shop and the executive offices stretching out on both sides, adding a very substantial amount of new exhibition space for the contemporary collection and for the American collection, which have been really intelligently reorganized and rehung. Eventually, the plan is that this great stair will lead you down into the Forum, and from the Forum, you can now connect into the great cross corridor, which we always called the tunnel, but which the museum has rebranded as the vaulted walkway, which was original to the building, and it was the way that the architects imagined that you would enter the building, come in and enter elevators and go up into the galleries. No one expected anyone that would actually be silly enough to walk up the rocky steps. So this great historic feature is reestablished, and the original light wells that brought light to it are used to bring light to it again. Ultimately, the plan is that to the right, under the now glass covered light wells, you'll enter the new underground galleries under the great courtyard. This great the Guastavino vaulted walkway is a historic part of the building that no one has been in for about 40 years because it was necessary to use what is now the reopened north entrance as a loading dock, which was not part of the original plan for the building. So that was an improvisation that is now no longer necessary. In any case, I must confess to you that I've been involved in marginal ways with this project from the beginning, so I don't come at it with an objective point of view. But I think that I can be objective in saying it's beautifully executed, and the reviews are very good.
Thank you, David. Appreciate both of your input there and giving us those updates. Also, we have Nando Makale on the call. Nando, do you want to give us a little commentary on the work you've done as DAG through the Central Delaware Advocacy Group as it relates to that Durst project on the water? And you are muted if you're talking. Well, I'll say a couple things and Nando will figure out his IT. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we are recording DAG meetings. Used to in the days before we were on Zoom, we're off the record. But given our chance to share these with a wider audience, we've elected to record them, and it'll probably either Friday or Saturday be up on our website. So if you go to the events page, you'll be able to share this with anyone that you want. We post the links through YouTube and share them on our website. So our last many presentations are up there, including the new Peaceland School at UCity Square, as well as Emily Smith and Shimi Zakin's presentation on how they propose to save the painted bride. So those are up there as well. Nando, are you able to get your audio working? Failing that, Marcia, do you want to let us know what's going on in our DAG June meeting that's upcoming?
Yes, thanks, Eli. So last month, the Inquirer featured an article on the closing of SEPTA's Somerset Station, and then another article on its quick reopening, which probably was a result of community folks protesting the closing. In fact, a few DAG members were among those protesters. Benny Whitaker, who is today's monitor, was one of them. The challenges in Kensington reach far beyond the status of the station, as you all know. Dr. Bill McKinney, our speaker next month, will be addressing those challenges, as well as delving into bigger strategies, such as achieving social equity and economic empowerment, and more. Dr. McKinney is the executive director of the New Kensington Community Development Corporation. So that's June 10th at 10 a.m. See you there. Thanks, Eli.
And that is up on our website. Thank you, Marcia. So anyone who wants to go there can head there, and if you have to get a ticket, but the tickets are free through Eventbrite. I see Nando is on the call now. There he is. Hey, Nando.
Yeah. Hey,
Can you give us an update on your work through CDAG?
Sure. Yeah. So for those of you who don't know, DAG has a seat on CDAG and has participated over the last few years in helping them respond to proposals along the waterfront and generally helping with Central Delaware Overlay District. We were asked, CDAG was asked to represent, to be the RCO. We were the only RCO available for the Durst proposal at Vine Street. And that proposal went before the CDR last week and it was approved. But I'll give you a little bit of color on that. There were a lot of comments. CDAG submitted comments about the facades, about integration with the historic fabric of the community. And I think one of the, at least from my perspective, one of the most important parts of that had to do with how Durst's proposal integrate or connected to Columbus Boulevard. They had used an ADA stair kind of parallel to Columbus Boulevard, which basically cut off direct connections from their retail, which was up at a terrace level down to the waterfront. So that was discussed in the CDR, both by the CDR members, by myself as a representative of CDAG, and also by DRWC. The conversation ended with an agreement that they would continue to work with CDAG on the issues that were presented, but the civic design review was concluded at that session. So it actually went through only one CDR review and then it was approved. Subsequent to that, we have set up calls, we CDAG have set up calls with Durst to continue that discussion to improve the urban design and the architectural composition of that building. So that's the update from our role on CDAG.
Thank you, Nando. So I think that is it on the announcement side. Again, as you have questions or anything you want to bring up during our panel, please put it in the chat and we'll make sure they all get answered. And with that, I want to introduce Venice Whitaker, who will be moderating today's session. In addition to being a River Ward's neighborhood activist, she volunteers a lot of her time advocating for the reuse of buildings and really focusing on safe construction practices. And she also serves in her volunteer time as a steering committee member for DAG. And this is a first for us. We have the whole panel there at one of the wonderful venues we're going to be discussing today. Everyone's vaccinated and ready to go. So with that, I will ask Justin, who is running that, to unmute. Thank you. And Venice, please take it away.
Hey guys, are you guys reading us here? Can you hear us okay?
Yes, loud and clear.
Learning how to use mics again. Give us a sec.
Hello, it's on.
It's on.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us here. if I could get access to share the screen, see if I did a little PowerPoint.
You should be good to go. If you share screen, it should let you.
It's not giving me away.
So this is why we need to do things live again, because we are tired of being on Zoom. Thanks to everybody who has been vaccinated. We appreciate it.
So while we're looking for the PowerPoint pulled up, just want to thank everyone and for the introduction. Eli, from Philadelphia. Music is in my blood. I had no choice from it. Grew up seeing every band that you can imagine playing through here in venues that were licensed and unlicensed, underground, do it yourself, in buildings that you would never realize that are existing now as residential, that, and again, I hope the PowerPoint comes up, that were once music venues. As we have seen, through the growth in Philadelphia, which has been great, that at the same time we're losing our art spaces. Recently an artist had called it vulnerable venues, that they are buildings out there that are being pressured for more luxury residential, or they're endangered for demolition. So this has been something that's resting on me, like what is happening to our artists and our musicians. So I put a little panel together with speakers that are here. We're having a little, like I said, the PowerPoint, so we may just go right into a discussion so I could get the PowerPoint up and running. So we have a panel here, and I'll just go around and have everyone introduce themselves and say a few points, and then we'll get into a discussion.
Hi, my name is Rana Fayez. I'm the founder and director at Yellow Punk. I am also a performer, DJ, and Philadelphia is now home. I grew up going to punk shows since I was a teenager, learned a lot about music that way, made a lot of friends. Music has always been a home to me. So when venues close, I feel like places I call home close, and that really upsets me because it's really hard to find a space that feels, and I hate using the word safe spaces because there's no really safe space, but places that feel like home, that feel comfortable, that provide that sense of community.
Hey everybody, how you doing? My name's James Mann. I'm the owner of Green Rock Tavern in the Port Richmond section of Philadelphia, and I am also an actively working musician who has lost quite a bit during the pandemic. Had a tour booked, national tour across the United States for 75 plus dates, and obviously all of that was canceled because of the pandemic. And we put out a record consecutively right as the pandemic happened, which was basically Died on the Vine. So that's my perspective of what's going on. And I'll add more later. I'll pass off the mic to Brendan.
I have my own, thanks. I'm Brendan Olkus. I'm the owner of the St. Lazarus Bar at Front and Gerard in Fishtown. Excuse me. I was a DJ and music producer for 20 years plus. Worked with Interscope Records, worked with in music my entire adult life, and opened my venue in 2008. And yeah, we're just about to reopen after over a year of being shuttered due to COVID, which was just sort of the icing on the cake of the struggles that we have as venue owners in the city.
Helping out with some technical difficulties. I'm over here in the corner. I run Warehouse on Watts. Yeah, we all kind of went through the same struggle during pandemic for sure. With me, we have a bigger venue here, so it wasn't feasible to kind of open and run at half or quarter or 10th capacity. So yeah, the struggles definitely was rough. I'm lucky enough to own the building. Otherwise, I would have been underwater, month 2. But we're kind of hanging tight and hoping that the resurgence of, events coming to the city is going to really help us kick back into normal life here at the venue, at least.
Okay, so it looks like my PowerPoint is not working. unless I hold my laptop up to the camera. I'm not sure if I really want to do that. So right now we'll just, I guess, try to go into a discussion.
Do you want to email it to me?
I'm having a problem with the access because I did it under. So
Okay.
well,
We simply have to remember that the Wright brothers airplane was made of paper and wood.
It's a bit low tech with a high tech.
They had some metal in the motor.
That's true, sorry.
all right. It's a little do it yourself, but you know what? I guess that's kind of like the topic right now. So okay. Oh, let's go. Why is that? All right. I'm still trying to get this up.
I think Brendan's much more, the timbre of your voice is much more appealing.
I disagree.
So Brendan and I were actually discussing that after the pandemic happens or ends, hopefully comes to an end sooner than later, that the next problem that we're going to have to deal with is the constant encroachment of new construction, keeping a volume cap on some of these venues. Brendan owns the Saint, and you're allowed to have music until 2 o'clock, correct? So there's a venue in the Northern Liberty section of Philadelphia called Ortlieb's, which has had their volume capped at midnight and then capped again at 11 o'clock.
And Ortlieb's, for reference, I'm sure if you're from Philadelphia, you're familiar with Ortlieb's. Ortlieb's has existed as a bar that had live music for as long as the brewery was there.
So over
Probably
100
the
years.
turn of the last century, you know, and now they have to get out of there. Basically, there's no way for them to you know, be able to make enough money to stay in business. And
So the residents moved into this neighborhood to be close to a venue like Ortlieb's because of all its charm and character and history. And now they're trying to essentially cap what they can do and how they can operate.
And again, as reference, Ortlieb's remained an operating venue when the brewery had literally fallen into decay and it looked like a bomb went off in that neighborhood. There was nothing. I went to high school at 4th and George, right around the corner from there. And when I was in high school, it was like post-apocalyptic, you know. The Schlitz Brewery was Schmitz, sorry. Schlitz is malt liquor.
And it was literally Poplar to Girard Avenue. So what was it, 4 or 5 city blocks
Yeah,
of just
I mean,
desolation?
easily.
And that was the only venue,
the only thing,
the only standing building,
the only non-residential
the only
building.
non-residential standing building was Ortlieb's.
Right. And they remained in business and they, you know, they kept what they had safe and clean. And, you know, it was like the shining light. You know, they had some of the greatest jazz musicians ever to play, you know, ever to come out of Philadelphia played there. I mean, Sid Simmons was their resident pianist, like band leader, you know, up until, you know, I don't know, 15 years ago or something like that. And then they started to build, you know, the neighborhood started to get saturated and, you know, one after the other. And, you know, some stuff looks pretty nice. You know, there's some architecturally pleasing things, but there's also a lot of stuff that's just thrown up to try to accommodate the popularity of the neighborhood, which doesn't really aesthetically bring any benefit. And it certainly doesn't bring interesting people in. I'm sorry, you know,
Well,
if,
my
if
question
we're
is,
being
who are
honest.
these buildings for? Right? Who are these buildings for?
I don't know. You know, that's a good question. I think that there was, you know, for example, I bought my house at Second and Master almost 20 years ago. And when I bought my house, the neighborhood was a great neighborhood. I mean, it was working class. It was mixed ethnically. There's a mosque around the corner. There's a church right up, like, you know, 20 steps from my house. Everybody lived together. Like, one of the first days that I was there, one of my neighbors knocked on the door and said, "Hey, dude, you left your keys in you know, in your trunk." You know,
So then, Brendan, can you just touch on like how it has been running your venue, the Saint?
I will.
especially
This is all tied together.
population,
Yeah.
and then after that to go to, you know, I'd like to go because I think Rana is a good follow up on your venue.
Yeah, this is all tied together. So you know, I'd been there for a long time, and I watched it slowly change, and then all of a sudden just rapidly change. And you know, I'm not displeased with that, you know, entirely. It's certainly adds some things, and you know, that's the give and take. But at my venue at Front Girard, you know, when I bought it, people used to cross the street before I bought it. People would walk across the street, didn't want to walk in front of the place because it was, you know, it was a pretty seedy thing. We got in there, we changed the dynamic, we made it a, you know, a sort of a I don't know, populated with artists and people that were
Just to add one point, Brendan is located at Front and Girard. It's an old building. It's been there probably since like 1860. It's always been a bar, commercial, barber. So he's reusing an old building, very
Yeah, it's been-
challenging in Fishtown.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, updating the building's been difficult in itself. Anyway, so I bought the building. I bought the business, rent the building. When I bought it, everything around me was just burnt out. There was an empty warehouse next door. There were vacant lots across the street. There were abandoned houses across the street. You know, it was a high crime corner, high accident corner. We took it over. We changed the dynamic. We tried to make it as nice as possible. We cleaned it up. We stayed on top of it, and you know, we operated as we were for 7 years, and then people started to build. First, the property right next to me became a condo building, which, in all honesty, it's some really good people there, and we haven't had many problems with that at all, other than, you know, dealing with the debris, not being able to use our outside space because it's completely filthy all the time, and contractors not paying attention to what effects the, you know, construction has on the neighborhood. Our sidewalk traps being, you know, clogged up, having to spend $1,000 every month on having our plumbing fixed because it was filled with rocks and debris and so on, which, you know, it is what it is, you know. Then they started to build across the street. It's 2 lots. One is I think is it 6 or 8 stories with, I'm not exactly sure the units, but it's above 30 units, providing 11 parking spaces, right? When the building inspector that just inspected me for, you know, it was just a whole other story, came in and was talking to me about it. I was explaining to him why I wasn't doing seating outside because it was filthy. I couldn't operate. I couldn't make any money there. It wasn't feasible because of the construction, which, again, I accept that as a partner in a community, that those things will happen, and a member of society. I understand that sometimes it's a give and take, but when it's just a give all the time, it gets a bit frustrating. And my point is that now, with the construction, has come a whole sort of change in tenor with all the neighbors. They're frustrated by the way these guys put the buildings up across the street, right on the street right behind the construction. My parking lot is directly next to the contractor. I was working on having to permit the parking lot for just to park my car on it, because the neighbors on the street behind us, behind the parking lot, were so frustrated with the construction and everything that was going on that they were just lashing out at everybody. And I understand that, I get it. But as a result, it cost me, $15,000 just to be able to park a car on my lot that I rent, and that I resurfaced. It was literally a trash dump before I dug it out, graveled it, fenced it off, cleaned it up, kept it lit, kept security in it, kept it clean every single day, twice a day. And, Venice will tell you, she knows us. And still, as these guys are doing whatever they want, L&I is harassing me. I can't afford that. But I did it anyway. I went through that process. And it was, the pandemic comes. I mean, and though the entire time, mind you, when I'm not there in the daytime, the guys that are building the buildings next to us are using my lot, right, to load giant trucks and machinery and driving through my lot, digging up the gravel so that when it rains, the lot becomes a swamp and I can't drain it and cars are getting stuck. And no matter how many times I went to these guys and asked them to not, they knocked chains off the front of the lot, I mean, everything. They just ignored it essentially, because they had so many contractors working that they, oh, it's those contractors, you have to talk to them. Insane, right? But yet I'm dealing with having to pay the fines for them parking on my lot. So as I'm going through the process with the ZBA to have it rezoned, they're parking on my lot and getting me fined. So the pandemic hits, everything shuts down. The process going through the ZBA and going through L&I to have it rezoned stops, as everything else stops. But inspectors didn't seem to stop. They were still out there, checking in to make sure that they could find people. And I received several fines during the pandemic when I was closed because these guys continued to park on my lot. That's the attitude that the builders have towards the community in general. And as a venue owner, you're already under this tremendous amount of scrutiny, despite the fact that Comcast doesn't pay any taxes, right? The largest employer in the maybe the state, I don't know, other than the state of Pennsylvania itself, multi-billion dollar corporation. Us, before I make $1, I mean, if I laid out what the tax structure was just for me to operate, it would make your head spin. And not to mention all of the other costs, not to mention dealing with the dram shop laws that are these archaic, laws that are set up to say that if someone leaves your place and has a falls, just, regardless if they're on medication or whatever, falls, they can sue you and take everything from you, right? These things are still in place. So we're dealing with that. We're dealing with neighbors complaining about everything all the time. You have one neighbor that has an axe to grind and they have the right to just, ruin everything. So all this construction.
So Brendan, I'm going to stop you there because, but this is an important point, is that, how construction and the growth in residential is affecting small everyday business. This is something that I hear on a daily basis because it happens so much, but no one is speaking for the small independent businesses. No one's speaking for the people, so I'm going to switch it over to Rana to kind of talk about like how she has experienced working as an artist and promotion and all those things, prior, during the pandemic. And also, what's to come? What's going to happen to our small venues that are trying to survive? What's going to happen to our artists? What's going to happen to our music? People come here for culture, but the culture doesn't have a place. Where are they going to go?
Thanks, Benice. So one of the main things we were looking into pre-pandemic is actually opening a space. We have a lot of community partners. We have forged a lot of relationships with local venues. But the really important thing was to have a space to call our own for, a community hub. And as I see music venues, they are community hubs. They are homes for communities. They are homes for scenes. And what's really unfortunate sometimes is that scenes tend to be segregated. The idea is that we wanted to create a venue where, and we see that in the music industry to begin with. This did not start with venues. It started with music industry, right? It seems like, the very reason why Lil Nas X couldn't really chart in a country charts is because, in the beginning, he was Black, right? So he was charting in hip hop charts, even though he identified as a country musician. So that kind of affected venues and scenes in general too. So the idea is we wanted to create a space that was safe for people of color, a queer positive space, a space that is welcoming to all, but the costs are just astronomical to rent a space, pay liability taxes. Completely decided to put that on hold during the pandemic. It was not worth pursuing. So at this point, we're kind of looking for spaces after the dust settles, businesses go back to normal, everybody's vaccinated, that we're trying to see what's left, what's open, who's there to work with. And my hope is that all the music venues survive, because the more spaces we have, the more homes for culture we have. And we need support to make sure that happens.
Do you think, were there neighborhoods that were more open for, venues and entertainment as you're talking to, that are now maybe closed to, not as welcoming to have you?
In what sense? So post-pandemic sense, or what we represent mission-wise sense?
Just overall, as when you came here as a musician and a DJ and a promoter, just throwing it out there, there more open opportunities to perform in more affordable areas as West Philly or other places that now are really focused on residential and like luxury living than really the arts?
Sure. So as everybody knows, there are many more music venues in Fishtown than anywhere in the city. That is why Yellow Punk is kind of specifically focused on venues in Fishtown. Venues in Fishtown have made it more affordable for us to have events. So I also DJ Johnny Brenda's, and that's another reason why we hold our annual festival there. They've made it really affordable for us, and made a really welcoming space for us to work there. But there have been some other spaces that have asked us to advance up to, I think the number I quoted you earlier was like $2,500. We have to guarantee the bar before even talking about booking bands there. And that's just wildly unaffordable. But the more I started looking into what it costs to run a space, the more I understood how expensive it is. It is really hard to find a space that is welcoming for all of the above, everything that we represent. So.
Thank you. So we're gonna try to get back to the PowerPoint really quick before we continue. So I just did it again. Okay, so this is an example of a place that used to be a venue back in the day and is now been it's a residential living with no aspect whatsoever of anything of the culture. Another example, this place was fondly known as the Moz. And it was a lot of underground music happened there. Now I believe it's a Starbucks. So every time I walk by, I'm like, oh, the Moz. I mean, it's a much better condition, but it shows you that this building is so old. It has so much uses to it. It would be nice to see culture to come back to it. The bank. The bank has gone through multiple of changes. It's now De Bruno Brothers, I think, catering. Again, lots of like music went through there, from goth to industrial to hip hop, you name it. Every floor was filled with people. And it just, there was a nice music hub along Spring Garden. It's escaping me right now, the West Club, and that was underground, the same thing. A lot of bands, I believe it's not there anymore. This was the CEO in West Philly. It's still being used as a community center, which is great, but same thing. A lot of like musicians and artists used to go through there. Just a little thing that, you know, they would give out at music venues and things from the Man, New Order, Tower, still there for now. We'll see. I know they had some issues right before the pandemic. Just the advertisement of flyers. A music CD that went throughout during the pandemic to try to raise money for venues that were going under. I believe Boots and Saddle ended up closing permanently through the pandemic. Just some more flyers that shows you like of places. Club Pizzazz was a club that's down at Margaret Orthodox, a little corner place that's still there. This was placed off of South Street. It's recently been sold for luxury residential. It's still being reused, which is good, but it used to have a lot of goth shows through there. Just some examples of tickets. One of my favorites, Revival. It was a bank, turned into a club, and it is now a restaurant. JC Dobbs, unprotected on South Street, been shuttered for a long time. We'll see if this, you know, if it continues to stand or maybe hit by the wrecking ball. Electric Factory has moved quite a few times in Philadelphia, and it's now has switched over to a New York venue owner, Franklin something, Franklin Music Hall. You name it, people went through there. Prince, David Bowie, everyone. It was just the place to see, the venue to see. Beastie Boys, Kraftwerk, Live Nation came through, took ownership, and now it's closed for now, but we'll see. Trocadero. Trocadero has been a venue for a very long time, burlesque club in Chinatown. I don't know the full story of why they closed, but I will assume that, you know, it's just the cost of money. It is designated historic, so inside and out in some ways. So they had a lot of cost issues, and, you know, having our structures designated is great, but at the same time, it puts a cost burden on them. Ortlieb's, as was mentioned earlier, and how it's just surrounded and sponged by residentials. There should have been something put into place before building that. An old theater that's now been demolished. A cafe that used to hold music and arts, Rocket Cat Cafe in Fishtown. This is a place out in West Philly, Kiltime. If you close in and you see the graffiti there. This is just a little that shows everyone that are the speakers. Just by me, a little back in the day. All right, so I'm going to switch it over now to Jamie Mann. Jamie's been a longtime musician in Philadelphia and has kind of seen the changes of how things have been, the performances, the lack of space, and just really the struggles of how, you know, you can get, how there's not that space to perform.
I was just mentioning a couple of seconds ago off camera. There seems to be a common thread, at least throughout the last 35 years of me being active in the music community in Philadelphia, that an alternative venue opens, oftentimes tries to go for licensing, they become a legitimate venue and is refused. And then within a couple of years, it's now a luxury housing. I've seen it happen over and over and over again. It's a piggybacking. It seems that our community of artists and musicians go into a neighborhood, repurpose these abandoned buildings, and within 10 years, we're then priced or out, we're kicked out, and they turn into luxury housing. I've seen it happen. A good example would be 38th and Lancaster corridor, punk venues such as Stalag 13 or the Fake House or the Kill Time that were there very, very, very vibrant communities in the late 80s and early 90s that are now gone. I don't even know what's there anymore. I saw it happen in Northern Liberties through the 80s and 90s. Again, same thing. Artists moving into the community. There's house parties, there's punk shows, warehouse spaces appropriated. Media Bureau was a great example at 4th and Fairmount. That's now luxury housing. That's gone. Just happens over and over and over again. We go into these communities and then we're then kicked out, you know, and then there's no mechanism put into place to help us get the proper licensing. I think now that's what we're also discussing. And that's your case. You're trying to get the proper licensing and to be able to do what you want to do. But it's an ongoing thing for the last 35 years that we go into these communities and within 10 years, we're then kicked out. That's what we're trying to fix.
If I could actually hop in there. It's interesting you say that because like growing up, like I'm not from Philly originally, but I moved here in 2002 for college and fell in love with the city because of the accessibility to shows and to parties and just being, you know, young and being around people and social life. And it's such a great vibe and it's such a good pace. You know, you go to New York and it's overwhelming at times. There's so much stuff you can do everywhere, but in Philly, like it was a cool vibe because like you can go down the street, go to a house party, you can go to a dive bar, get $4 beers. But like now, what's happening is that it's not that there isn't lack of artists or lack of music. It's just that they're getting bought up by these huge Fillmores, by these Live Nations, like all the little stuff that you would do independently, where you get the smaller artists a platform, are now being kind of like bulldozed by these massive conglomerate companies. And, you know, from a developer standpoint, I understand, you know, it's like, we want to make money. We want people to be in the neighborhood so they could, you know, go to these bars and give you support. And, you know, I am all for better, you know, communities and nicer areas, people caring about, you know, their city, but they also have to care for the people that was the original draw to the city. You know, we're the original kind of, you know, reason people stick around. At least for me personally, that was a big reason why I stuck around. And I think, you know, what happens is you'll see it where like the pandemic hit and how many of your neighbors moved to the suburbs? You know, how many people that moved here in the past 5 years bought a really nice house, pandemic hit, they rolled because they didn't really appreciate that like the city has more to offer than just accessibility to the store. You know, there's more here because of people like us that stick our necks out. And I know we sit here and complain, we're going to say, yeah, we have to go through all this stuff and there's all these regulations and it costs so much money. But when it comes to it, like we love it because we're sick. I don't know. we want to give back. We want it to be, you know, we want to contribute to what the city has given us.
So, and just to ask, I mean, how many of us have been here who have either hosted an event, been at events that had the cops called on them because the music was too loud? I'm raising my hand like 100 times at this point. Whereas, you know, at that, you know, it's back in the day, you could have all these things. You can do all this. And again, growth is great, but people have complained it's too loud. Well, you live in the city. You live in the city. And you're allowed to have noise under 11 o'clock, you know, and also, you know, how many people have been at events or hosted events where the cops were called because people of color were attending those events. That is a major profiling issue, and it happens all the time, you know, throughout there. And that's, you know, a big thing that, you know, I would like if Brendan would touch on that, because his venue is very open space and he experiences that a lot.
Yeah, my venue is predominantly, I mean, it's mixed in every way, but I'd say that it's predominantly people of color, you know, our clientele. My wife is Black. She's my general manager. She's dealt with people, you know, police, whatever, just completely looking over her, you know, and giving, like, showing her no respect when they've shown up for ridiculous calls that, you know, neighbors made. We've just had issues that other venues, like, you know, there are venues up the street at 2 o'clock in the morning. There's no crowd control. There are fights in the middle of the street. There's all this stuff, you know, and you never hear anything about it. You never hear anything about it.
That's the bigger venues, right?
Yeah, bigger venues. Yeah, I mean, you know, Fillmore's right up the street from me. You know, giant corporate run venues. Exactly. We deal with stuff that, you know, and you never hear anything about it. But if a nickel drops and it's too loud outside of my place, it's like 50 cops show up, shut the intersection down, you know, and it's like, dude, this is insane. Like, why are you pulling up and have your lights flashing and are pulling my door open and nothing's happened? Like, there's not even, someone made a call for no reason and you don't see it happen anywhere else. And it's absolutely 100% motivated by race, without a doubt. You know, why dance around it? It happens all the time. Also, you know, in the context of people complaining about noise, you know, living in the city, my venue's under the L. Okay, my venue's under the L, right? I've gone out with a decibel meter, right, and measured my volume at its loudest, which I've spent so much money insulating my building, but this ancient building, right? I step away and you can't hear it from 8 feet away, 10 feet away. If the door opens and you hear noise, okay, but every 10 minutes, on, you know, actually every 5 minutes, a train is roaring by your window at a decibel level that's, you know, exponentially louder than the loudest point in my system. And you call and complain about noise.
Does the L
It's
get a
nuts.
noise violation?
Yeah, we have a noise violation.
No, does the L get a noise violation?
Yeah,
Does septic
exactly.
get
You know what I mean? You bought a place that your window looks out onto the train, you know, onto the platform. And you're going to complain about my, you know, a little bit of noise when the door opens on a weekend at Front and Girard. Don't forget the trolleys, you know, which aren't running now, but trolleys are super noisy too. Like, what do you mean? And we deal with that constantly, but in terms of the racial dynamic, without a doubt, new neighbors move in from the suburbs. They have a different approach to life than I do, I guess. They look at the world differently than I do, and see things differently than I do, and are absolutely 100% affected by, you know, the racial dynamic, without a doubt.
What I think is really upsetting is that the very things that attract people to a neighborhood, right? You want to live in a neighborhood where there's live music. You want to be able to visit a neighborhood where there's live music, but you're not willing to show up for it. You know, it's a community that's being built, and you also need to do your part in supporting it instead of erasing that culture that is built or that has existed in the neighborhood for a very long time. You can't just come in and say, wow, I live here. This is not the music I like, but I'm not going to complain about the music nights that I like, but I'm going to make it hell for everybody else and keep calling with noise complaints and just shut it down. You're effectively erasing a community, and that's not okay.
And also too, you know, back to the Fillmore thing. Fillmore packs the house with whatever they have going on. Everyone leaves, is like urinating all over the street, leaving their trash. I mean, my parking lot gets inundated with people illegally parking, dumping, throwing trash, urinating. Everything you could possibly imagine is happening, and nobody says anything about it. I don't hear anything on, you know, what's the Citizens app. I don't hear anything about anything. But if someone gets into a fight on the L platform, this happened last year before the pandemic. Someone was stabbed we weren't even open. It happened at like 4 o'clock in the morning. Someone was stabbed at the Girard Street L stop, and the Citizens app goes out, and it's like the racist, you know, the internet is like, you know, the racist underground railroad. You know what I mean? So it's like, the Citizens app is not set up to like keep people safe. It's set up to like for racists to prove their point, you know, to have like, see, I told you. And it's like, oh, it's the saint because of the saint. Dude, we've been closed for 2 hours. Like, no one's in the building, you know? No one took the L tonight. And they get caught, and all of a sudden it becomes a thing where I'm getting emails and I'm getting text messages like, dude, Citizens apps blaming you for this. I'm like, does that happen to anyone else? No.
So what do you all feel about the events that happen on the Parkway, the music events and all those things? Do you feel like they are a welcoming for like small artists, small venues? Do you think that they somehow offer that like spillover?
I feel like a lot of the events that happen on the Parkway are very contained. And a lot of people that end up going to those events are going to that one event only. I'm not sure if they're really interested in going to other events in the city. That's my experience. I'm not sure what everybody else thinks.
I'd actually like to see more representation from smaller local artists at some of these events, rather than, I know I love Patti LaBelle. She's from Philadelphia, and the Roots and whatnot. But I'd like to see some smaller representation at some of these much larger events and have some of the money come back in that way to the artists.
While I understand that it's on a bigger scale, and a lot of the times with those events they get broadcast nationally and people focus, so you're gonna naturally have these enormous acts, but there are ways to incorporate smaller, festivals have tents that are set up that you go to a festival and there's a huge headliner, but there are 5 or 6 tents set up that have smaller acts that get an opportunity to be billed with this larger act that gives them the promotional material to move ahead in their own careers, Right. You don't see it. You don't see it here at all. I mean, and let's be honest, Live Nation has so much control, and these larger bookers have so much control over what happens. And also people that I'm sorry, forgive me for saying this, but don't give a shit about music, that don't give a shit about culture, are the ones that are in charge of booking and organizing these shows. And at the end of the day, it's foolish to think that the city with such a rich and important musical history, I think, David Bowie would have preferred to record at Sigma than any other studio in the world. Let's not forget this, like Sound of Philadelphia, John Coltrane. I mean, the list goes on and on, the impact that the artists from the city have had. And they were all, Bowie was doing shows here when no one knew who the hell he was, So, and you had to come through Philly to get a name. So it's not that it doesn't exist. It's absolutely underrepresented because the people that are in charge of it don't ask. It's really simple. They don't look out and say, "Hey, what would everybody else like? What would make this better?" It's like, "Hey, we watch MTV Jams, and we watch the award shows, and that's who we're going to book." But
remember last year when the John Coltrane house was in danger of being demolished?
Yeah.
That shouldn't have been in question in the first place at all.
But there's so many ways to incorporate. My point is that it doesn't have to be such a
But think of it like this. So we used to have the Fringe Festival. It started in Old City, and you would go to one venue, and then you go another venue, another venue, another venue. So when they do these Parkway shows, or they do big shows at the Met or the Fillmore, why aren't they saying, "Hey, Saint, hey, wow, hey, DJ musician, we want to promote you as a follow-up from the show, or go to this place before and then come see us." Or you know what, we're going to have a weekend fest. We're going to cover the cost as a corporate business here for you guys to be part of it. There's not enough of that. You have places, again, like the Met right down the street from this amazing space, just kind of taking everything over and not giving an opportunity. Looks like Gavin wants to talk.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I was gonna recommend the exact thing. Like, I think South by Southwest, that's how they operate, right? You go, it's like a full weekend, and all the bars have different weekend. All the bars have different shows. Every venue is open. They have these huge headliners, and I'm sure the city gives them support. I don't see that happening in Philly. I know we do have a great, special events office. I've worked with them numerous times for, block parties and all that. And they give you could rent like trailers with sound systems, but it's still like the amount of money you have to front to do just a block party is insane. Like if we didn't have sponsors, thank you, Red Bull, we wouldn't be able to do half the stuff we do for the community, and if we can do something like that where there's a huge Parkway Fest, 2 days leading up to it, here's some grant money, or here's free access to XYZ, have your venue open, book a headliner, book someone from Philly that can be, at your venue to kind of hype up the bigger show down the street.
Well, funding for the arts have been slashed tremendously, so I don't know if there's a lot of grant money coming in this year. So
The other thing too is when those festivals are going on, if it's a celebration of a national holiday, for example, it doesn't make sense to only celebrate in one part of the city. If you have all this attention and all these tourists and all these things happening that, and they're fun. I mean, I'm not knocking that. I think it's awesome to do that stuff. I think the festivals on the Parkway are wonderful. I love to see all those people together and, having a great time and listening to music. It's great to see that in our city. But, if Austin's a great example with South by Southwest, it's not contained to a one block. It's not contained to one small area. It's the entire city becomes the festival. So, there are corridors like Girard Avenue, for example, that would be amazing for, you could shut Girard Avenue down for a few blocks and over to Frankfurt and over Front Street and all the venues that have small music spaces from Johnny Brenda's to Kung Fu Necktie to us to Barbary, you could make that sort of a part of the festival that you buy into. So you buy a ticket for the week and you check the Parkway out on the big day, but your ticket for the week gets you into the festival on Saturday in Fishtown, and then on Sunday in South Philly, and then Port Richmond on on Tuesday or whatever.
To chime in for 1 second, it's almost embarrassing that Philadelphia, with its rich tradition and history of music and arts, doesn't have a festival comparable to South by Southwest.
It's crazy.
It's crazy.
How many Philly artists are playing at South by Southwest every year? Is that's what's funny. Like you could go to South by Southwest and every single day at a different venue see a Philly band or a Philly DJ or a Philly rapper or a Philly, every single venue. They love us. Why don't we love us?
see, that was our vision with the very first Yellow Punk Festival. We actually had 2 stages and we had tickets of people going back and forth between 2 different venues. And it worked just fine.
What year was that?
That was 2017 was our very first festival, Labor Day weekend. Would have happened Labor Day weekend last year and this year, but we can't really go back to booking a big festival. I think people are going to ease into going out. There's a lot of COVID trauma to heal from. But that's the goal. So we usually would have the event, daytime, we're in the Korean Arts Building, and then nighttime, we're at Johnny Brenda's music venue. And the tickets actually apply for the entire weekend. So you buy 1 ticket, you get 1 wristband. And the venues, we agreed to a percentage payout. And then we know how much exactly we're going to pay the bands and the performers and the panelists. And that model really works. I think more people should adopt it.
We did this model as a single person, nonprofit organization with no help besides having to look for grants and everything.
Yeah, grant funded, crowd funded. I don't really know how many grants exist now for us, but Knight Foundation was one of our funders. The second year we did it. I'm very grateful. But to do something like this, you have to have support from grants because you never really know what's going to happen the weekend of. So it's also important to keep those tickets affordable. So if it's subsidized through grants, through city arts funding, which we were grantees of the Philadelphia Cultural Fund 1 year. We need to make sure that that funding is kept sustainable so we can subsidize the tickets to make it attractive for attendees to buy that 1 wristband and go support all the venues.
All right, so I'm going to take this opportunity because I know time is ticking. If anyone want to verbally ask questions for any of the panelists here, you can unmute yourself and chime in. I have lost the chat, so I'm not really sure where we're at there.
So there's a few questions coming in on the chat. Tom was brought up a good point. He said it's worth pointing out or paying attention to how developers benefit from art and music spaces who likely have good intentions to accelerate gentrification. How can we as promoters defend against that and not contribute to the problem?
Create more community-centered spaces, include the people in the neighborhood. If developers can also contribute to hiring people from neighborhoods where they're doing these developments, but also make sure that arts and culture is also taken care of and preserved instead of erased.
Set up grants. I mean, you sell you know, you're gonna make, everyone's does what they do to make money, you know, and you know, you're making a profit, kick back some money into the community, you know, offer grants for people that are doing interesting things to keep it interesting for the people that you're trying to sell or rent to. I mean,
Legislation as well too, for things like noise ordinances.
Yeah, I mean, I think for on the developer side, even just if you could offer like reasonable rent to artists that are coming in instead of it being, you know, a higher rent for a coffee shop or a salon, like things that have been like, there's obviously things that you want in your buildings. Like if you're a developer, you don't want a bar or a restaurant because it's going to be loud. People are living above it. If there's a way to sound insulate, create a space that can actually be beneficial for a venue or a bar or restaurant for your, you know, patrons, that'd be the way to do it. But I know it's kind of a balance you got to kind of work out. But definitely like offering some sort of rent discount for the arts, because I know there's plenty of grants and stuff available for developers on that side, I'm sure, to contribute.
With this question or?
Yeah, with this question.
Okay.
So Jamie, you know, leaned over and said, you know, legislation to help us out with noise ordinance. You know, like understand that if you move into a neighborhood that has an existing music venue, that you accept the fact that it may be loud. You know, it is what it is. You've moved next door to a place that's already been there, employing people, paying taxes, doing their, you know, doing everything that they're supposed to do, and bringing people and bringing interest to the neighborhood. Then you should accept the fact that it might, you know, might hear some sound every once in a while. And there's to legislate, you know, to change those, you know, some of those noise ordinance laws, or to incorporate it into a lease or into a purchase that, you know, you have to accept that this is what it is if you want to move here. I mean, it seems simple to me.
Yeah, that's how South Street was. I believe it is too, like allowance of music and things like that. So, okay, back over to you, Eli.
Karen Morris, do you want to unmute and talk through the example that you mentioned at 13th and Reed, and then ask your question?
Hi, sorry, can you see me, hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Sorry, I can't see myself, but yeah, I was just talking about the development at 13th and Reed where Theater Exile was, and they had kind of a cool warehouse space, but at some point, I'm not sure the exact parameters of who owned it and who sold it, but there's now, you know, like a 4 or 5 story apartment building there that's actually pretty attractive. The developer was Leo Adamando, but they worked out an agreement with Theater Exile to build them a new space within it. So again, you know, you don't want everything sanitized to the point that every art space gets rebuilt into new buildings, but I think it was one example of where the theater company could stay in the neighborhood since it was so rooted in the neighborhood. And then I had a question about, you know, I know the city is interested in, I mean, obviously this group, Design Advocacy Group, knows a lot about historic preservation and sort of the limitations there. And the city is interested in potentially, you know, trying to designate more buildings from a cultural preservation perspective so that the building doesn't have to be architecturally significant necessarily, but the history of what happened in that building or is currently happening in that building. So I didn't know what the panel felt about that. Obviously, you know, the city is working on these issues, and I'm part of a project that's looking at what other cities across the country are doing around cultural preservation. And it's a hard sort of nut to crack because many cities are really behind in designating landmarks and trying to preserve things. And it's hard to fight against sort of that market capitalism, obviously. So thanks.
So I have a story from another city when I was living in New York, and I used to DJ at this legendary gay bar called Heather's. It was like it was out of an 80s movie. It was one of my favorite places to play. The crowd was always great. The community was amazing. Everybody really cared for one another. That bar closed and reopened twice. It was in the East Village. And it ended up closing because of a noise ordinance. It's a bar. the bar has been there for a long time, and somebody that bought a condo around the corner somewhere, in the same, I think it was in a neighboring building or the same building upstairs, continues to complain and complain. And I think the fines just became too great for the bar owner to put up with. And she ended up just closing. And it was really the death of a community. We're all mourning it for years after. We still do. And it was a place that was considered very safe. And it just really erased that community. A lot of people ended up leaving the neighborhood. It was really upsetting. And I just don't want to have to relive the same experience over and over again.
And I think that's important because, you know what, just to mention, when you talked about the historical commission, it's very hard about cultural, because they were like, well, what's significant, and who lived there and who slept there, and but the culture, it's really hard. I was part of speakers for Sigma Sound. Like, how cannot Sigma Sound be just recognized? I mean, we have a David Bowie week, celebrating David Bowie's life here. He performed, 3 times in a row at Tower for the Glass Spider tour. He didn't do that anywhere else. David Bowie. And there was a chance that the building that he recorded Young Americans in was going to be demoed. The band that he had, Luther Vandross, and so many other people that came through there was, vulnerable. And the city isn't recognizing any of this. All right, back to you, Eli.
So Patrick Grossi's on the call. Patrick is the advocacy director at the Preservation Alliance, and I just wanted to see if he had any thoughts on sort of cultural designation and work that the Alliance is doing and things he's hearing.
Sure. Thanks, Eli. And hi, everybody. So, I mean, on this question, it's kind of a double-edged sword. So Venice is right that, when properties are trying to seek protection primarily for their cultural significance, that there's admittedly a barrier there. The other side of that, though, is that the way our preservation ordinance is written, there's nothing to prevent us from doing that right now. Like, the criteria that are applied to historic nominations are actually quite broad, certainly broader than the National Register, and certainly broader than a lot of other municipalities. So the opportunity is there. I mean, and that's how, my office, the Preservation Alliance, with Brewery Town Beats and a couple other partners, nominated Sigma Sound, and it was primarily on the strength of its social and cultural significance. The building itself is modest architecturally. We did include that in our analysis, but it wasn't really what was driving that discussion, right? It was the legacy of Sigma, and that nomination was received, well. It's kind of hard, like Venice just said, it's really kind of hard to deny the, frankly, international significance of a place like that. So I guess this is a long way of me saying that there are some opportunities already within the rules that have been established when it comes to designating historic properties. I think what's going to be harder is when we're not talking about a singular place with really kind of undeniable individual significance, and we're talking more about kind of broader neighborhood patterns, broader demographics, or changes in demographics over the course of the 20th century that we want to recognize somehow, and that may or may not be reflected by the built environment. There's a really relevant example of this out of Chicago recently, the Pilsen neighborhood, which was essentially developed like a lot of neighborhoods in Philly at the turn of the century as a white European ethnic immigrant neighborhood. Over the course of the 20th century, it became predominantly a Mexican-American neighborhood. And part of the way that was reflected architecturally was a series of murals that are kind of all over the neighborhood that really kind of celebrate and announce the area's Latinx heritage. Professionals there wanted to recognize that as a historic district and the full story, including some kind of recognition and protection of those murals, but faced opposition, frankly, from owners, from people whose narratives and histories were, attempting to be formalized in some way, and despite that, I think well-intentioned effort, the reality of historic designation and the perceptions of what it would mean for them as owners proved unsuccessful. So there's some good recent stories about that. Again, I know the city is thinking about it. When the city launches its kind of pilot of a cultural and historic resources survey, this is something they're going to be paying really close attention to. But I think, as Karen Morris also just alluded to a few moments ago, there's no kind of perfect tool set for this, right? This is really kind of an emerging conversation, and one that the preservation community writ large is really only wrestling with for the last 10 or 15 years, I would say, in a serious way, and even more seriously just in the last 5 years. So that's enough.
One more quick one for you, and I appreciate you jumping on, putting you on the spot. How much does something like Sigma start to set a precedent? Is it such a strong case that it's a no-brainer? It felt like a no-brainer, and it lives in a bit of isolation, or does it, in your mind, start to build a precedent case that you can then get something that maybe isn't as sort of linear a case, but is still along the same vein of cultural heritage?
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair question. I think, Frank, the precedent was already set, right? I think the John Coltrane House came up in the context of this conversation earlier. The Coltrane House was designated, a long time ago, solely on the strength of its association with Coltrane. It's a run-of-the-mill, turn-of-the-century row house. There's really nothing architecturally noteworthy about it. My office, likewise, was previously involved with an effort to recognize Joe Frazier's Gym on North Broad Street. Same deal, architecturally pretty modest, but because of its association with Frazier, it was listed. And Coltrane is listed as a National Historic Landmark, which is the highest designation a historic property can receive in the United States. So I think the precedent's there. I guess that's the point I'm ultimately trying to make, right? That the existing rules allow us to do this. I don't think it's about precedent setting. I think it's honestly more about quantity. I think it's just about doing it more and more so that it feels more normalized. But we have the opportunity to do it right now.
Thanks, Patrick.
So then I want to ask you, Patrick, so I had invested some time looking at J.C. Dobbs as being designated, and I was told no, because no one significant played there, even though Nirvana played there when they first came out, and the line was literally like blocks long. But since it wasn't like Beck, Oasis, like a lot of, George Thorogood, so many people, but maybe it didn't have like that length of history like Sigma, but I've been shot down with JC Dobbs. So maybe the Lions could help out with that.
Yeah, when JC Dobbs came up, that question was running through my mind, and I think you're right, Venice. That's the main hurdle there is more of a kind of recency bias, or a bias against recency. 50 years is kind of the unwritten rule of when a property starts to mature into some kind of historical significance, but that's not a hard and fast rule. I think you could push back on that. And so Dobbs might be a good test case for the recent history challenge, which we're talking, and that is a legitimate hurdle, right? Something that's more recent history. We're talking about the 90s as opposed to the late 60s and early 70s.
All right, well, we're at the end of our time here. Venice, I wanted to give you and the panel a chance to sign off. Any closing words before we wrap up?
Thank you very much, Eli. I want to just again thank everyone for coming here. I'm going to have them all give their last shout outs, especially on a Thursday morning, taking the time out, everyone feeling safe and vaccinated. So, this is like my first in-person virtual kind of thing. So I want to thank DAG for that too. And also, as everyone goes around, so, give them a shout out. So in the future, if you see any of them performing, or when they open their venues or their bars, make sure you give them some love, pass the word, share what they're doing, bring your friends, and keep it going, because venues and musicians and artists need consistency. They can't just base off of, tourism or whatever. They need the consistent support of Philly and their community. So I'm going to restore funding from the arts. I'm going to pass it down to everyone to give themselves, a shout out. Take notes who they are.
Hi, again, my name is Rana Fayez. I run Yellow Punk. That's YALLAPUNK. We are a queer-centered SWANA arts organization here in Philly. We've been asked a lot to do a touring festival. A lot of people want us to do pop-ups in different cities, but we were founded in Philly, and we would like to stay in Philly. Would love for Philly to give us a reason with funding, arts funding, to keep us here. So.
Thank you guys for your time. I'm James Mann again. I'm the owner of Green Rock Tavern and Philadelphia Magazine's 2019 still reigning champions, St. James and the Apostles for best band in the city. Thank you guys for your time.
Brendan August, thank you for your time. The owner of the St. Lazarus Bar. I hope that one day they put us on the cultural list, preservation list. I hope that we're around long enough to have had a significant impact on the landscape of the arts in this city.
Gavin DeRusso, Warehouse on Watts, formerly Club 923, formerly Dances, formerly 8 other different venues, but we're here now trying to, contribute to the arts as much as we can. We've been doing live streams all through the pandemic. Tune into Wow Philly TV. You can do it on Twitch. We have it through our website, wowphilly.com. And yeah, man, just keep in touch with what we got going on. We announce everything on social media, Wow Philly on Instagram, Facebook, and we're gonna do a big block party July 3rd. That's what I want to hype up right now. We're doing it all in house. We're gonna try to scratch together as much dough as we can to make it really fun. All local DJs, all local artists. Should be a good time. So put on your calendars and hopefully we'll see you guys here.
Thanks, everyone. We'll give you our virtual applause here. A couple things going into the chat about some resources there from Karen and Patrick. Thanks for sharing. And we will be back on June 10th with Dr. Bill McKinney from New Kensington CDC, talk about his work up in that community. So thanks, everyone, and have a great day.